Hello, everyone. This is Amira Armond from Carey Solutions, and we have Mark Hapeman as well from Carey Solutions. So I think we're on part 4 now
of
CMMC level 2 scoping. And we talked about CUI assets and what's applicable, and now we're kind of moving down the guide to security protection assets. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So our next category is security protection assets, SPA for short. And these are assets that provide security functions or capabilities to the organization seeking assessment, CMMC assessment scope. So what are examples of that? This is something providing a security function or capability. Okay, so firewalls are how you perform security requirements in level 2, at least some of them. You could have people, your sysadmin, who's doing patching or configuring the firewalls or doing change management, which are all requirements. You could, let's see, you could even you could kind of identify a database or an inventory as an asset if you wanted to go that far, to say that your inventory of all the systems you have is how you do one of the requirements, and so that inventory is an asset. Antivirus servers, another example. Scanning servers, another example.
Multi-factor authentication tools.
Yeah. And according to the scoping guide, software can be an asset. So if you've installed, say, a firewall program on a computer, you might consider that software to be an asset separate from the computer itself. Another thing to consider is there's plenty of assets, and we kind of talked about this last session. There's plenty of assets that fit into multiple categories. Right? So you could have something that is a controlled unclassified information asset, maybe a file server. But if you've got a firewall enabled on that file server, the Windows firewall or the Linux firewall, well, now it's being a security protection asset for itself. And so now we're kind of combining these categories, right? Which is one of the most confusing parts of this, because the scoping guide doesn't really give us very clear direction of which one wins, or if you're supposed to combine the requirements. And at this point, now that we're in final rule territory, my conversations with assessors, most of them are going towards the combining the categories approach when an asset fits into multiple ones, with the exception of specialized assets, which we'll talk more about. Okay. All right. So what are some other security protection assets? If you have a building that has CUI inside of it, you could call that building perimeter a security protection asset. I really appreciate when clients of mine, assessment clients, when they say, hey, here's our facility, here's the area where we have CUI in the facility, and here's a big locked door or an entry point, and that provides us security protection. The person who controls visitors could be a security protection asset.
So a software that limits, like a key card that limits access to an area, would be considered a security asset.
Oh yeah, so that's a great example. Very commonly, if an organization has both a main commercial network, then maybe they have FCI on, but they don't have CUI, and then they have a separate network for CUI, they will commonly have the key card system, right? The door control system on their commercial network, which is a scoping problem. Because we thought we knew what we were assessing. We thought we were assessing this enclave that was built for CUI, but now we have a security protection asset on this other network over here, which is generally secured at a lower level, right? So let's talk about that key card system. So the OSA expectations, right? The defense contractor, the organization seeking assessment, their requirements are actually very, very similar to the requirements for controlled and classified assets, right? So I think the only difference is they don't spell out SSP. Other than that, it's exactly the same. So document them in your inventory. You need to know what you have, even if it's on a different system. You need to talk about how you're doing the security requirements in your SSP. You need to have them on your network diagram, and then you need to prepare to be assessed against CMMC level 2 security requirements.
All
So
110.
That is surely what I read, right, on
Yep.
this scoping guide. Is even if it's an SPA on a different network, that it's saying make sure it's really secure. But here's the good news. The assessment requirements are very different for an SPA. So as an assessor, the only thing that I am told to assess is the security requirements that are relevant to the capabilities provided, which means that for that door lock system, I am only going to say, is it locking doors? Right? Is it doing a good job of access control for the physical facility? Does it have the ability to restrict access? Right? And that's all I'm going to ask for. And assessors, according to this guidance, are not going to spontaneously check anything else for that door lock system. Okay, but keep in mind that the DoD is saying that thing should be secure, and the DoD might use this to get some contractors if they feel like they want to enforce this, but it's not going to be done by a C3PAO assessor.
And so let's use that key card example again, as long as the assessor, the C3PAO assessor, sees that it locks and unlocks doors, they try 2 people's cards, let's say, that's where they're going to stop. They're not going to, or it's not likely that they're going to say, give me the key card of somebody that processes CUI, and I want to see if it lets them in and out of the room where we keep CUI.
So I would still consider that to be related to the security capabilities provided. Okay. What I would not expect an assessor to say is, tell me how that door lock system is being patched. Tell me about the multi-factor authentication for the door lock system, right? To log in to admin it. Tell me how you're doing vulnerability scanning of that door lock system. Those are all stuff that are requirements for the scope, right? For everything in scope. But the assessor, assuming that they're a reasonable assessor that knows where the mandate is, right? It says do this, it does not say do more. They're just going to say, so, okay, so let me break it down. In general, if your system security plan for one of those 110 requirements say the way we do this is the door lock system, then the assessor is going to go check to see if the door lock system does that. If your system security plan does not mention the door lock system at all, we're not going to go check the door lock system. We're going to check whatever your system security plan says is how you do the thing, right? Do the requirement. And that goes for lots of stuff. So you know, there might be a requirement that, say there's a requirement that says, search for malware before you allow it to be downloaded or processed, you know, in a file, right? Search for malware before it can be accessed. Well, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. The language of the requirement is purposefully written to allow the contractor to pick how they want to do it. So you could say, we're going to install an antivirus program like Sophos on our computers, and it's going to check for malware as we download files, right? Or you could say, I'm going to install an antivirus program on my email server, and we're going to check files using my email server. Or you could say, I'm going to install, I'm going to get a really high quality firewall. Like I think Palo Alto's can do this, but I'm not totally sure, where they've got like a database of all the bad file signatures. And as you download stuff, it's smart enough to recognize, oh, that's not a good one, and block it at the firewall, right? Or you can do a combination of all three, which of course is, from a security standpoint, like, great, right? I love to see that. But if you did not, if you only said the way we do this is by controlling email and then controlling the firewall, and you didn't actually have an antivirus server, you know, that's doing desktop protection, as an assessor, assuming that I think that you've adequately handled the requirement with this combination of email plus firewall, then all I would check is, are you doing the email and firewall protections? And I would only look at those. I'm not going to be like, hey, do you have another antivirus server somewhere else that you haven't mentioned in your SSP? I'm not going to go searching. It's really going to be limited to what is written in the system security plan of how you're doing this requirement. Now, side note about system security plans. So in a system security plan, your defense contractors are expected to talk to each of the requirements, right? Ideally, each of the assessment objectives, and not just say, I'm doing this, but they're supposed to say how they're doing it. What technology are you using, right? What process are you using? Who's doing it? Now, in some cases, you might have those specific details in a different document, right? You might have your SSP that says, yes, we do this, and check this document for the Windows computers, check this document for the Linux servers, check this document for the firewalls, right? And then you have it split out just to keep stuff controlled. I personally, as an assessor, would consider all those documents to be part of your SSP. They might not be called an SSP, but it has the information that should be in an SSP. So I'm going to consider all those 5 documents to be the SSP. They're just split up. So you do need to get down to the detail of how you're doing it and actually say, you know, this is the security protection asset that I'm doing the requirement with, or if the system is doing it itself.
Well, and I think too that speaks to the need to limit your SSP to what is critical to meet the CMMC level too. You know, just in your example, you get 2-3 documents deep and you're just adding to scope for an assessor, right? Am I understanding that correctly? And so, like, you need to fully explain in detail what you're doing, but you also want to be aware of not pulling non-necessary assets into your scope. Yes, no.
Yes and no, right? So we have these visions of assessors being brilliant people who are utterly flexible, and
Like
they know
you.
all the technology. Yeah, on a good day, maybe. You know, they're well caffeinated, right? But not every assessor is. Not every moment of an assessor's life is like that, right? They could have fallen off a horse the day before. Who knows? So anyways, what I recommend, when you're writing your system security plan, if you want to limit questions from your assessor, if you want to limit confusion from your assessor, then just like you said, Mark, talk about your in-scope environment, right? And if you want to talk about something that's not in scope for your environment, make it real clear right there. I want to talk about this FCI system in a different network because I think it's important to document that, and here's where I want to document it. This is not in scope for CMMC level 2. Like, write that right there, right? Like, notate, assessor, this is not your deal. Go away. This is my deal, not yours. And that can reduce a lot of confusion by assessors.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we're close to the end of this little segment. But let's look at our cute little diagram here, right? So what would be a security protection asset in this case? So firewall, almost guaranteed, would be a security protection asset. You can actually have a situation where you're doing all of the network protection tasks on the asset itself. Say you've got a software firewall turned on that's doing everything, right? Very, very secure. You can say, hey, local to this laptop, I've got denied by default firewalls. I've got the ports restricted. I'm monitoring communications. I'm controlling communications. And you could say, I don't need this firewall over here, right? Don't need it. It's not doing anything for me. Look at this laptop for those requirements. And that's actually something that people do, right? It is one of the solutions out there. And that is especially a solution when you take this laptop, you take it home with somebody, and they're remote working. How are you still doing all of that network security? Because you don't want to be reliant upon that home router to be doing it, right? The access point. You want this laptop to be extremely secure and independent of that. So what we'll see is some people will take a VPN that turns on automatically, and once that VPN connection is established, now they're using that corporate firewall for security. Or they'll put a lot of firewall security around this laptop, right? So you could say this laptop is a security protection asset for itself. You could say this firewall is doing security. Sysadmin is almost certainly doing security. If this antivirus server is talked about as doing some of the requirements, again, security. Switches may or may not be a security protection asset. It depends, typically, if they do some sort of network communications flow control.
Like a VLAN or something,
yep,
where you're logically separating the different subnets.
Yep. So if something provides a boundary for you in the form of VLANs or an access control list, that's typically going to force it to be a security protection asset. But we're, as assessors, unless the thing has CUI in it, right, which would make it both a CUI asset or security protection asset, we're only going to check that it's doing the security thing that you're using it for. We're not going to check all the requirements. Still on you to do all the requirements. We're not going to check. Okay, well, I think that's it for security protection assets.
Great, thank you very much.